Hi, if you're watching this video, it's because you're either currently taking or you are about to take a college algebra course. So the purpose of this video is to provide you with a brief introduction of what to expect as you take this class. In general, so what is college algebra? What are the types of things you're going to study? So college algebra, just very generically, it's the study of algebraic relationships and functions. And so that sounds kind of a little bit vague. And so I'll get into a little bit more detail. Why do you study college algebra? Really, there's a couple of different purposes. One is, as we study these algebraic relationships and functions, one of our goals is to be able to learn how to graph these things. So we want to be able to graph functions on an XY plane. The second goal is to be able to solve real-world applications. So you'll find as you study this wide variety of functions, some of them we actually then directly apply to real-world scenarios. And so studying those functions allows us to do that and to do some pretty cool analysis of real-world situations. And the third one that maybe doesn't affect everybody, if you are finishing your math series with this college algebra class, then congratulations, you may be done with your last math class. But for some of you, you might be moving on to additional math. Maybe you're moving on to calculus. And calculus, believe it or not, uses a lot of algebra. So students that take the college algebra course as a foundation for moving into calculus, it really gives them just really good foundation algebra skills that they'll find they'll be using over and over again. So as I think about college algebra and all the different topics and things that you're about to study, I have split it up into three kind of primary areas. Somebody else might choose to divide it up differently. This is just the way that I tend to think about it and kind of box it into categories. So the first section is a study of functions. So college algebra is a lot about focusing on different types of functions. I have a few listed here. We have linear functions, quadratic functions, absolute values, radicals, polynomials is a big one, rational functions, exponential, and finally logarithmic. So there's all these different types of functions that you're going to study. The second category that I have is systems of equations and inequalities, and that kind of bridges into this topic called matrices. So this is kind of another area of study in addition to all the functions. And then finally, the third one that I have here is, I call it a family of equations that aren't functions necessarily. One of the big ones that's covered is called a section on conics, and that includes things like circles, ellipses, hyperbolas, sideways parabolas, those types of things. So all those terms may not be familiar to you now, but ideally by the end of the course they will be. Now I will throw out there that not all college algebra courses cover all of this stuff. The functions pieces, that's pretty generic, that's pretty standard to be included. Systems of equations and inequalities, pretty standard as well. You may look at systems of 2x2s, 3x3s. The equations may be linear, they may not be linear. The matrices is the part that you may or may not delve into that depending on the scope of how far your instructor or the course textbook takes you. And then the other piece, the families of equations, the conics. Most algebra courses for college algebra, they'll touch on circles, but ellipses, hyperbolas, sideways parabolas, you may or may not get into that. You may find that maybe more common in perhaps maybe a pre-calculus class. But in general, these are kind of the three areas of emphasis that you're going to explore over the upcoming weeks. How does the course typically flow? Over here, I've kind of given three categories there. As you study each of these topics, the goal is going to be able to recognize and classify the type of equation or function that you're studying. So for example, if I give you an equation, is it a polynomial? Is it a system of equations? Is it a logarithmic? So as you progress throughout this course and build layer upon layer the exposure to the different types of things, you should ultimately be able to recognize what type of equation or function it is. And then once you do that, the compelling reason for that is once you know what category it is, then you can either manipulate, solve, or graph the equation or the function. Some problems may ask you to do all three. They may ask you to just do one or the other. It just kind of depends. But recognizing the type will then allow you to draw upon a series of resources that you're going to learn so that you know the proper way to go handle that type of equation. And then finally, the goal would be, in some cases, to solve or study real-world applications. So as we think about quadratics, exponentials, logarithmic, and another class I hadn't mentioned yet, variation equations. It's really common that we want to study real world applications as we do those. Okay, so this is kind of very, very broad overview. The key is that this is a college class. It is a college math class. And because of that, there is an expectation that you do have a background into some levels of algebra that were previously studied. So things like, what is the XY plane? What is the coordinate system? What is a function? And then what are the proper algebraic techniques that you would use based on the type of function that you have? Like, what are the legal algebraic manipulation maneuvers you can use if something's a radical, if something's an absolute value? So there is an expectation that you do have some background, some familiarity with that. So here's the key question is, how good is your background? If some of you recently completed a different algebra course, maybe an intermediate algebra course, you may be brushed up on all these skills and ready to go. Some of you, however, maybe you haven't taken a math class in 20 years or longer. You may be feeling a little bit intimidated that you don't quite remember how to do these things. And some of you may have recently finished a algebra class, or maybe it's been a couple of years, but you passed by the skin of your teeth and you didn't really quite understand all this that was going on. So the good news is this: as you embark upon a college algebra course, it's very common that they do a review, that they start the class off with a review. So sometimes they'll move through it fairly quickly because they assume you already have had this foundation and they just want to remind you that you already know it. If you feel like you didn't quite know it, or it's been a really long time, the review may feel like it's moving at a pretty rapid pace, and that's okay. And so that's one of the reasons why the next few videos that this will link into are videos that cover reviews. So if you feel like you have a really good foundation, you already have solid algebra skills, and you're ready to move into truly the college algebra topics, you may be able to skip past these next several videos. Otherwise, this video will start to link you into a review of these types of concepts. I'm going to post some videos that talk about what is the XY plane and how do you graph. What is factoring? How do you do it? What is a function, and what is the domain and range of a function? Those types of foundation principles. And then also solving equations. You can't really learn how to manipulate or solve equations until you understand the proper algebraic techniques you're allowed to use, like what's legal to do when you have rational equations or absolute value equations. So I'll also have a series of videos posted that's organized by function type, so that you can recall or learn the proper algebra techniques that you're supposed to be using with those. So again, wherever you're at, this is kind of the overall focus of college algebra, and I wish you the best of luck in your class.